when you come upon noxious or what we call harmful stimuli, pain tells you that, oh, back away, you're about to hurt yourself, or that will hurt you. It helps us to stay away from sharp things. It helps us to stay away from really hot temperatures, really cold things. It keeps you alive. Pain is an experience. And that in itself should tell you where the pain is happening, and will also inform why pain is so diverse, why pain is so different from everyone. It's fundamentally an experience, and experience is very individual. We're trying to understand how you can feel, how you can be in so much pain and yet not have a physical injury to attribute that pain to. Well, you have people, have you heard of fibromyalgia, who have widespread pain, but we're not entirely sure why they're in pain or where the pain is coming from. Why is the pain transitioning from an acute, useful pain to a very unpleasant chronic pain? Acute pain is useful, chronic pain is not.
Have you ever wondered why pain is so hard to measure despite almost everybody experiencing it? And why two people with the same exact injury experience completely different levels of pain? Why is chronic pain, despite decades of research, one of the hardest problems to treat? Pain isn't just a signal, it's a perception. And understanding how the brain constructs pain might be one of the biggest challenges in neuroscience today. Hello, I'm Avnish, and this is The Early Perspective, a podcast where we explore how the brain works, how it changes, and what that means for how we learn, think, and live. Today's topic is pain. And I don't mean pain in the abstract. I mean the science of why it exists, why it sometimes refuses to go away, and also why it's so frustratingly hard to treat. To help us break all of this down, I'm thrilled to welcome our guest, Gabriella Muwanga. She recently finished her PhD in neuroscience from Stanford University. And here she investigated neuroimmune interactions in post-injury pain under Dr. Vivian Tawfik and Rog Aaron. She now works as a scientific analyst, supporting life science companies with patent and intellectual property work. She works on translating scientific discoveries into ways that actually benefit people. Gabriella, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Of course. So I just wanted to start with you, because I think many people assume that pain research is just something that people fall into. How did you actually end up here? Was there anything specific that really hooked you in?
Yes, there was something very specific. I've been suffering from chronic pain most of my life. Initially, my interest with the brain came from being very fascinated by how human beings were able to create things like music, writing, and art, and sort of I wanted to understand what underlay that. But as a teenager, I started to experience pain, and the pain sort of never went away. And having to deal with the pain and interacting with pain clinicians, having to go through so many different kinds of pain medications, it was pretty clear to me that this is something that is a pretty big thing that we need to be handling better. And that's when I was like, I'm going to join the forces, doing research to understand better so that we can have better medications to treat people that suffer from chronic pain.
Was there any specific part of pain research that you really focused on because of this?
So I did not really focus on any specific part of pain because of it. So I've been getting migraines for a long time, and as a teenager, I started suffering from chronic lower back pain. So a lot of pain is similar yet different. So I wanted to fundamentally understand pain in whatever form it came, because pain looks different for everyone where it is, but pain is pain, and I think
Yeah.
a lot of the underlying things are the same. So my desire going into pain research was to understand pain in general. Also, at the level that I wanted to start doing pain research, it's not that easy to specialize. So it's better to start big, keep going smaller.
Yeah, that's a very fair point to make. Okay, first, thank you for sharing your story. So now that we have some of your background, let's just ground this conversation for something listeners who don't have a background in neuroscience are coming into. So when scientists talk about pain, what are we actually talking about? Because it's something that everybody just like really uses and throws around, but is the scientific definition different from what people just generally assume that it is?
Yes. The scientific definition of pain was actually, they came up with it. All these different groups of scientists and clinicians sat down with like, what do we define pain as? And I'm going to read from the official definition of pain. So the
Mm-hmm.
official definition of pain is it is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage or described in terms of such damage. What I want to pull out for you is pain as an experience. And that in itself should tell you where the pain is happening, and will also inform why pain is so diverse, why pain is so different from everyone. It's fundamentally an experience, and experience is very individual.
And then also one of the parts of your definition was it's associated with actual or potential tissue damage. So does that mean it has to be associated with that? Or what about different kinds of pain?
So it doesn't. So this is why there was so much discussion, and why it took all these big brains so many days to come up with a definition that people would be comfortable with. So pain
Mm-hmm.
isn't always associated with tissue damage, but biologically that's what pain is for. Pain is supposed to preserve you. It's important
Mm-hmm.
because when you come upon noxious, or what we call harmful stimuli, pain tells you that, oh, back away, you're about to hurt yourself, or that will hurt you. It helps us to stay away from sharp things. It helps us to stay away from really hot temperatures, really cold things. It keeps you alive. And so, in that way, it's meant to be associated with some kind of tissue damage, or to prevent tissue damage. However, there might be biological changes in your body that make your body believe that there is harm where there is no harm. So, in that situation, you may not have any actual tissue damage, but that's not what the code is telling your brain.
And then there still ends up being the same kind of
The
pain
same
response.
experience,
Yeah.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
but
Right. So then how does your brain decide how much pain to administer at a specific experience or stimuli which occurs?
so
What's happening there?
So you have these cells, neurons in your body. This is
Mm-hmm.
a neuroscience podcast, so I'm assuming people have heard neurons,
Yeah.
at least in some capacity. So you have these specific neurons that transmit these signals that are coming from noxious stimuli, and you have a threshold. Yeah? And below this threshold, you have what you call non-harmful stimuli, where it'll send these signals to your brain, to your spinal cord. Your spinal cord will send it up to your brain. Your brain will be like, this is fine. There's no potential tissue damage. But above that threshold, the pain, the brain will interpret that as pain, because there's no one single brain region that's responsible for pain. You have the key places like the somatosensory cortex, where a lot of the signals are going directly, that it's connected to your, what you call your primitive brain, places like the amygdala that process all these raw emotions. And so all of those work together to produce this pain experience. And so your body is pre-coded to know that to this level, that's not painful. Above this level, that's not good. Stay away from it. Yeah. And there's also cellular signals. Have you, I'm coming from maybe immune cells. For example, you have an infection, and these bacteria are releasing all these, we call them cell signals. So chemicals, basically, that your cells are responding to. And they're saying, okay, so you have a problem here. And that could translate as pain. It's telling your body, this is where the issue is. You need to do something about this. It could be life threatening.
Mm-hmm. So then you're essentially saying that there could be a threshold, and then if you go above that threshold, you're feeling pain, or if there's something potentially life threatening, your body also gives pain responses so that your body realizes that it needs to handle it.
Yes. So if you go above this threshold where your body is like, okay, this might be dangerous, the pain your body, your pain centers
Hmm.
will interpret that,
To
okay,
protect
this is
itself.
pain, to
Yeah.
protect itself, because pain is
Hmm.
fundamentally protective. It's supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's when something goes wrong, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah. And then what makes this threshold different in different people? Like how come some people are more tolerant to pain compared to others?
So I guess this is where it comes into the pain is an experience.
Hmm.
Because when you get down to the wiring, who's to say that the threshold isn't exactly the same in everyone? Because they're signals,
Hmm.
they're electrical signals. Yeah, it could be the same signal that your brain is translating differently. So I think when we think about pain threshold, it isn't necessarily that of course, there are differences in within a certain range of human beings that this is sort of how it's going to differ, but threshold. But a lot of what people call a difference in pain threshold is coming from how people experience pain.
Hmm.
So
So,
some people might have more of a negative affect associated to pain than others.
right. And then are there other factors that go into how that entire pain experienced is formed? What else really plays a role in how we feel or perceive pain?
Yes, um, it could be starting with your physiology, starting with your environment, it could be how you've seen other people deal with pain, how pain is perceived in your culture, how, for example, this is sort of an easy thing, like men are not supposed to feel certain amounts of pain, so that will affect how they perceive pain and how they deal with pain. So yeah, your behavior, your environment, sort of the nature nurture sort of classic thing that comes into pain is it's going to be your environment interacting with your biology to inform how you have your experience.
And then could something like you being sick, for example, make an injury feel worse? Or could like make the pain feel even worse?
Like you having an injury,
Yeah, if you had an injury and you were sick, for example, would you end up feeling more pain as a result?
you could have more pain. So when we talk about pain, we talk about two things, something called allodynia
Hmm.
and another thing called hyperalgesia. So for allodynia, in those situations, you have something that shouldn't be painful becoming painful. For example, touch. Like if you have like a pretty recent burn, sometimes if you have a burn area, if you touch it, like really really hurts. Touch is not supposed to be painful, but because you have allodynia, your body is interpreting a non-painful stimulus as a painful stimulus. And on the other hand, you have hypoalgesia, which is an exaggerated response to a painful stimulus. So this happens if you already have a nervous system that is sensitized, for example, by an injury or an illness. It's going to be hyper. It's going to overreact. To
Hmm.
let me use that word. And so something that was going to be this painful is going to be like this painful. So
Right.
that's what we call hypoalgesia.
And then, so you're saying that there could be physiological factors. There could also just be cultural factors, which are all affecting how your pain
There's a lot because
experience is
yes, it
formed.
all goes back to your brain, the pain being an experience. So there's a lot of like
Hmm.
psychosocial things that are interacting with your biology to inform your pain experience.
And then, of course, this ties perfectly into a common phrase that people often say that pain is in the brain, but then that almost is kind of dismissive of the fact that it's not real. But then, of course, pain is real, as we
It
talked
is
about.
real. So pain is in the brain. This is sort of one of those things that gets me like it's frustrating. Um, Pain. People say like the pain is in your head, the pain is in your mind. That is reductive. If I will say yes, the pain is in your head. So is your thinking. So is a lot of things. Your breathing is in your head and transmits to your body. So it's simplifying something. So I think a lot of people hear that. I've heard that too. People calling it is called psychosomatic. So sometimes when they cannot find a physical cause of your pain, there's no visible tissue injury, but this person is in pain. I think our medical systems are very much like there has to be a source, which is thankfully changing. The source is internal in that situation. So that's where a lot of the research is. We're trying to understand how you can feel, how you can be in so much pain and yet not have a physical injury to attribute that pain to. So there's changes in your nervous system. There could be changes in your endocrine system, your hormones, all these things that are changing within your body that are informing your pain experience. And also, it could be past trauma. For example, you had a very old injury, you had really bad pain, and you have memories of that really bad pain that rewiring your brain and informing your future experience. That could also be something that is causing you to have pain. So when they say pain is in your head, people like to think like, well, they're saying the pain is not real. I think they might be trying to get at the point that it's something is happening up here that is feeding you lies. Let me put it that way, or is it's like a broken signal.
Mm-hmm.
You feel the pain, and we need to be able to identify the source of that fake signal or what the fake signal is to be able to counteract that signal. And
Right.
sometimes the best way to counteract that is using medications. The best way to interact that is using therapy, psychotherapy, to sort of get at the root of where that signal is coming from to help someone's pain. So pain is in the brain, but it's not in your head.
Mm-hmm. So then that you're essentially saying that that statement, especially to many people, ends up being misleading
Yes,
because it's not. It is a lot more than just in your brain. Everything is in your brain, right?
it's reductive. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think some people it could also come off as dismissive.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and yeah, I don't think nothing should ever be reduced to just something so, because nothing
Right.
is that black and white, that simple.
Mm-hmm. And then I think another distinction in pain research is acute versus chronic pain.
Yes.
Of course, they feel very different to people, but what is actually happening biologically? What is the distinction between the two?
So acute pain is the pain we like. Acute pain is important for survival. We talked about this briefly earlier. It has a clear biological function, which we also touched on briefly. Is if I touch a hot iron, it's going to feel painful. I'm going to pull my hand away in time to prevent further tissue damage. That's useful. And acute pain also has a set time limit. Going back to the flat iron again, I move my hand from the iron, there's going to be some lingering pain, but eventually it goes away. It served its purpose. So I think those are the key things. And acute pain, because it has such a clear origin and it has a set time, it has enabled researchers to have a pretty clear understanding of how acute pain works. Chronic pain, on the other hand, is so we define it as pain in humans that's lasting longer than 3 months and doesn't always have a clear origin. For example, you have people, have you heard of fibromyalgia, who have widespread pain, but we're not entirely sure why they're in pain or where the pain
Yeah,
is coming from.
yeah,
They're in pain and it's sort of, it infiltrates every part of their life. Or it could be someone had a fracture, for example. They had acute pain, but then their fracture healed and they're still in pain. So the pain has outlasted its usefulness. And so that's one of the big questions that we have in pain research right now is, for example, I studied post injury pain. Why is the pain transitioning from an acute useful pain to a very unpleasant chronic pain? In people where the pain is just idiopathic, we're not entirely sure where the pain is coming from. That is trickier to study. Also because pain is so different from one person to the other, and it's not something you can see. I think that's another
right,
thing, another challenge that we have in pain research is if we could find a way to just see pain, objectively see pain. That would really help the research. But those are the biggest differences between chronic and acute pain. One is it has a time course, clear time course, clear beginning, clear end, clear cause, and can because of that, because we understand that, we can treat it. And chronic pain, we're not entirely sure why it's still there. It has multifactorial causes, so it could be caused by a bunch of things. So you sort of have to go down the list and be like, okay, what is going on here? What's going on there? And this list has also come from years of research. Some things might come off, other things might come on. But yeah, so that's why chronic pain is like a big monster for us.
Mhm. So, are there any pretty big causes of chronic pain that we've found, or is research still kind of uh it's still unknown in research because, as you said, it's very hard to figure out what is actually happening in that transition.
Yeah. So biologically, there's just I think our favorite thing to talk about when it comes to chronic pain is what we call central sensitization, which I might have touched on briefly earlier. So basically, your threshold, your body becomes like it's in a state of disarray. I will say, instead of, if you have your set point, your home base, yeah, and so your body, the set point changes. It moves from, okay, we're good, we're living life, to more of what's going to happen, what's going to happen, what's going to happen sort of thing. Yeah. So a sensitized nervous system is going to respond it's going to overreact. In these situations is where you're going to have someone having allodynia, where they're responding to a non-painful stimulus with pain because their system is sensitized. And that sensitization, your threshold for pain has gone down. And so non painful stimulus is painful, painful stimulus becomes overly. Yeah. So with things changes like that in your nervous system, where previously it was like, okay, this is painful stimuli, that is not painful stimuli, because of changes that may be caused by injury sometimes, could be caused by other things, disease, cancer. Um, your system now is it's been confused basically. Your system has been confused, and its new normal is not normal. I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah,
Yeah, then
yes,
yeah.
yes. So that is one thing I think, yeah, that is underlying chronic pain is central sensitization. And also rewiring in that same vein of the brain, of different brain regions. We call them nociplastic changes. So your brain is has is moving to a configuration that is pro pain. Let me put it that way. That sounded like that was not intended, a not intended pun. But yeah, I hope that was clear.
Yeah. So then potentially one of the biggest causes is that that threshold is getting lowered in, especially to an extent that you're feeling a lot of sup- stimuli which are not supposed to be painful as painful, and then the rest of them are even more painful
The
than
pain.
usual.
So those are some of the hallmarks of chronic pain, or what we look at in pain research
Right.
as yeah, pointers to a sensitized system.
And then are conditions where you just don't feel pain at all, like SEPA. If, I'm not sure if you know what that is, but is that just that threshold being removed? I mean, sorry, being higher, like raised to the max, or
So congenital insensitivity to pain is so they have a deletion of an important channel. Are you familiar with sodium channels?
yeah.
So basically, they're important for the spreading of action potentials and how neurons communicate. And so, in people with congenital insensitivity to pain, they're missing some very key channels. And because of that, they can't feel pain. It isn't just that their pain threshold is crazy. It's they can't perceive pain. So a lot of people that have congenital insensitivity to pain may not live as long as they might because, like I told you, acute pain is useful. So they won't feel if they break their leg. For example, young kids, they're going to be kids. For example, you have this young
Mm-hmm.
boy who's jumping off of suspiciously high ledges. They land, they break their leg. They don't know they broke their leg because it doesn't hurt. And in that situation, they're going to cause more injury because usually if you feel the pain of a broken leg, you're going to be like you're going to guard the leg, and that is useful in preventing, hopefully preventing further injury. You don't feel the pain, you don't know the leg is broken, you're going to injure yourself more. So in that case, yeah, so that is an extreme that's not great either because like we've
Mm-hmm.
talked about, pain is useful. Acute pain is useful, chronic pain is not.
Yeah, of course, especially Many people think that having no pain is a good thing, but of course, it's really, really not a good thing because pain is needed for our survival.
Yes, it's there for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. And then, how exactly are these channels kind of being removed, leading to this lack of pain or this insensitivity to
Well, I think that is a good question for a geneticist. But yeah, they're
it?
genetic mutations. It's sort of one of those things that
Right.
genes are interesting. So it's luck of the draw. I think someone more into genetics might have a more in depth answer to that. But everyone has different genes, has different codes, and sometimes your DNA mutates. Your and you end up with things that maybe at some point the body thought it was useful. It's not useful. For example, I come from Uganda. We live in a region, sub-Saharan Africa, that has very high in malaria, and because of that, we're also really high in sickle cell. And that is a mutation that was an adaptation to the malaria, because people that have sickle cell anemia don't get malaria because of the way their red blood cells are shaped. Sickle cell sucks. It's not a useful mutation, but it was a response to the environment. So that might be one of those things. Well, it's useful for not getting malaria, just harmful for a lot of other things. Yeah. So sometimes the
Right.
body is doing things we don't want it to do, and genes are funny like that. Is you don't know how. There's a lot of research into mutations and
Yeah.
altering the genome. So yes, this is one of those things where you're unlikely to have a genetic predisposition, and your genes
Hmm.
decide you don't need. Yeah.
So
So
then, it's just a negative mutation
yes, it's one of
to
those things.
essentially, right?
Yes.
And then I think another fundamental problem in pain research is really trying to measure pain. Of course, when you're looking at other kinds of measurements in healthcare, it's you can measure blood pressure, tumor size, run blood work. But then when it comes to pain, if you go to a hospital, they say rate your pain from 1 to 10. So then, how do researchers actually end up measuring pain in studies, and what are the limits of that?
Um. Well, well, I don't know if I'm going to tell you that we do better than. So the self-report scales are very useful. Um,
Yeah.
because it is one thing, but in research, it's not the only thing that you rely on. In the
Hmm.
clinic, they also have these pretty comprehensive questionnaires that I've developed. One of them is called the McGill Pain Questionnaire that they use to assess pain quality and intensity. So it's just really long that is asking you about where your pain is, how much the pain is, then a lot of like depression and anxiety, because these are things they call the triad that are very interconnected. So to give you the information
Hmm.
about the pain, behavior observations. So you could I talked about guarding earlier, but if someone is in pain, sometimes you use facial grimace in animals, and it can be used with people. You record someone's facial expressions, and some people use that to analyze and sort of get a more objective measure of someone's pain based on their facial grimace. But then that's also dependent on how someone perceives their pain, because someone
Right.
an amount of pain may not be causing as much facial reaction as another person. And neuron studies. So neuronal conduction studies could be helpful. So looking at the spikes and hyperactivity of a neuron, you could also use EEG, and you use functional brain imaging. Um, I don't know if you've heard of fMRI.
Yeah, I kind of.
Yeah. So things like that. But the thing with fMRI is it's indirect. You're not looking at pain. These are all sort of things that could be an indicator of pain,
Hmm.
but aren't actually measuring the pain, because the pain itself is very tricky to measure. So it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that come together to get some sort of picture of what the pain level is. But yes, we're very much reliant on the self report.
Hmm. But then, if you're, how do you use self-reporting on larger studies? If you have multiple people, won't each person's self-reporting scale kind of be different in general? Because somebody's 7 out of 10 could be completely different from somebody else's, right?
That's true. But then if you have someone acting as their own baseline, then you could
Mm-hmm.
interpret it that way. For
Right.
example, if you're evaluating a therapy and they came in and they're like, man, I can't move, my pain is at like 9, and then you've given them this intervention that you're testing for your research,
Mm-hmm.
and then you've been tracking how their pain is all this time. So those changes compared to themselves are informative. Because
Right.
if the pain is changing, the scale is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it from that change perspective, then that is something that you can standardize.
Mm-hmm. The change is more of an objective measure comparatively. But then, as a general measure of pain, do you think there'll ever be something just objective compared to all of these subjective interpretations?
Yeah, people. Well, there's a lot of research out there into
Mm-hmm.
how we can objectively measure pain. One of those, like I just talked about, the facial grimace. So looking at,
Mm-hmm.
um, for example, have you done physiotherapy before?
No.
So you could use like weight bearing. For example, if someone has a broken leg and you
Right.
have this machine, it has two plates. It measures how much weight you're putting on one leg versus the other. Usually, it should be about 50-50. If your leg hurts, you're going to put more weight on the non-painful leg than on the painful leg. And if your pain is getting better, that balance will be, hopefully, you re-achieved. So that is one of the things, for example, in a situation like that, that could be more of an objective measure of spontaneous pain. And I guess looking at brain signals would be very helpful. But then a lot of the ways to study electrical activity in the brain are very invasive. So it's not something you can just put in everyone just as a proactive measure.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But there's a lot of study. People are looking at using ultrasound, using fMRI, just and other ways of measuring uh, neural activity that can be associated to pain levels. But because of the nature of pain, which I keep getting into, having an objective measure is still something that we need to actively work on.
Is even the neural response subjective, depending, even if you're given the same pain stimuli, because of like the different factors that we did talk about before?
So a difference if you're looking at the neural activity, well, where are you measuring? Is the question.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because I would think if you're measuring at the in the periphery, that there should be like a range of normal, a range of like what you tend to see. But
Right.
when it gets to the brain, which is just so different one person to the other, that's
Yeah.
where you might start to see more changes. But if you have a large enough sample, you might start to get like again some range of normal that and with some deviations because we are very different but also similar.
Right. And then also want to just pivot to different kind of pain research being done in animal models, of course. And then a lot of that is because of the ethical limitations that is there when you're doing research on humans. Then also you can't just ask a mouse how much something
No, you
hurts.
can't. You can't. A mouse
So
won't tell
then
you what. Oh, my pain is
exactly.
from like 1 to. It's like a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah.
So no,
So
we
then
don't.
how is the measurement happening there? How are we confident about what we're learning there?
So in pain models for rodents, we use a series of behavioral tests to evaluate pain. We talked earlier about allodynia and hypoalgesia.
Mm-hmm.
So we measure the sensitivity of these animals. We start with mechanical sensitivity, for example, a response to like a poke to the paw. And you have different sizes of filaments that will apply different levels of force, moving from non painful to painful. And if you have these animals responding to a non painful stimuli with a painful response, you can be like, okay, this mouse might be in pain. If you have if you test it using temperature, like you have varying levels of heat applied to the paw, if they're responding to something that shouldn't be noxious heat or harmful heat with a harmful response, you're like, okay, this mouse might or rat might be in pain. or if they have an exaggerated response to a painful stimulus, this mouse or rat might be in pain. So that's a part of the evoked, what we call evoked pain tests, because you're applying a stimulus and seeing a response. And then you have the non evoked measures where you can use an open field test where you're just recording the animal freely behaving. And you will see some changes in the behavior because of an animal in pain. For example, maybe guarding of the paw. If their paw is in pain, they will walk around less or they'll socialize less. They'll spend more time in their own corner. And so these are sort of things you can observe in these animals that could be an indicator of pain. It also could be an indicator of other things. But yes, in combination with the evoked test, that could also be informing you about their level of pain. We also talked about weight bearing, which we just talked about very recently. If you have an animal with an injury in their leg, they're gonna put more weight on the other leg than the injured leg. So that could also be a readout of this animal's pain. So that's sort of how we try to get at measuring animal pain.
And then are these measures something which we can confidently say are right, or is there a lack of confidence or objectivity in this?
So they've worked. The tests have worked. Because, for example, if we talk about the evoked test, there is a lot of difference in who's testing. It depends on who is measuring. So there is variation from one tester to the other. But then the if the thing you see is reproducible not only in your hands but in other scientists' hands, then what you're seeing is a true thing. Which is we put a lot of emphasis on rigor, scientific
Yeah.
rigor, and reproducibility. So if you're doing good science using the tools you have, then we should be able to be confident in your findings. I think the biggest issue we have with, well, not just animal pain research, but just animal research in general, is we might be doing really good science that's really rigorous, and all these things we know are really helpful for rodents, but not necessarily for humans, because rodents aren't humans, and while we may be or mammals and such, there are really key differences. But animal research is very useful for things like, because it tells you where to look, tells
Hmm.
you what you could look at. Because otherwise, where do we start in humans?
Right. So then you're saying that especially if you do 10 different studies in 10 different people's hands and they all seem similar, you can be pretty confident about the
That they're
results
they're
of
seeing
them.
something. They're
Yeah,
seeing something,
exactly.
and yeah, and it might not be like a multi-site study happening at the same time. But then if you have something that has been studied, like for example, pain research for years, that you've seen something happen over and over again, you know that this is something that is real. This is something that is happening. Yeah, and that is something that could inform further study. Yeah.
Are rodents the main ones which are being used, the main kinds of animal studies which are being
Uh,
done?
well, I think it's because they're accessible. Yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
non-human primates are very expensive and they're very tough to get your hands on, for good reason. Um, they're the It's very tightly controlled research in non-human primates. Doing pain research in worms might not be as useful for humans or in flies, and
Right.
so we do a lot of research in rodents.
And they're the primary kind of animal being used?
For pain research,
Yeah.
yes, from what I've seen, we do a lot of rodent pain studies.
Right. Okay, so last question. A lot of people listening to this have probably dealt with pain, sports injuries, headaches, or maybe even something more serious. So if you could give them one idea that changes how they think about their own experience with pain, what do you think that would be?
The one thing that I've had to teach myself, well, one is listen to your body.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in pain, there's a reason, and you need to find that reason to stop being in pain. And I know it can be very discouraging, especially if you've had a lot of you've gone to the hospital a bunch and they're like, we don't see what could be causing your pain. The pain is there for a reason, and ignoring it is not going to help. On the other end of ignoring it, dwelling on it is not going to help either, because there's also a bunch of research in it that that sort of dwelling on the pain it could make the pain worse. And the other thing is a lot of, I think it goes to a lot of self-treatment. Is when you're in pain, it's very tough to think about other things. But then a good way to counteract negative feelings is to introduce positive feelings. So if you could do one thing that could relax you and draw your mind away from the pain, it might not take the pain away, but it might give you peace while you sort of figure out a way to deal with the pain. Yeah.
I think
And
that's incredible advice. Yeah.
if you have pain, find someone who will advocate for you to figure out why the pain is there and to get rid of the pain. And it might be hard, but there are people like that out there. And put yourself first.
Yeah, it's great advice. Also, actually, that I guess that wasn't the last question, but then if somebody who's is also trying to get into pain research like yourself, how would they get into this field? What do you think is the best pathway that they can follow, or the best mindset that they can adopt?
Well, keep asking questions. I would say. I think that's the key thing to being a scientist. Keep asking questions. If you are in high school right now trying to figure out where do I go to college, what do I study, this is a good place to start. Find out what are the universities in my area, what do they offer. Of course, it's useful to understand biology, to study pain, so that I could start there. But yes, keep asking questions and go for it.
And then you'll find yourself eventually in what you want to do.
Um, you will know where to start. You will know what
Yeah.
not to do,
Yeah, for sure.
and you will know where to pivot. Where to pivot, yeah, is keep asking questions and know. I guess this is something that you learn with practice: is know how to ask the right questions, because not every question is a useful question. But keep
Yeah.
asking questions and ask the right questions. Yeah.
And also, I guess just learn from your failures if you do have any, and
Yeah.
just keep
Yeah, because
learning and improving,
because
right?
everything you learn refines your questions. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's an iterative process. And if you know how to ask questions and you refine your question asking, that's key to being a scientist, because that's all a
Yeah.
scientist does, is they ask questions and then ask better questions. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a great mindset. Okay. Gabriella, thank you so much for joining me here today. This was genuinely a fascinating conversation, and you made something really complex feel very approachable in general. I think pain affects more people than cancer, diabetes, and a lot of things combined, and yet the science of it is still
Yeah.
has enormous gaps in it.
Yes. Yeah.
What
I
I'm
think the
taking away
biggest
from this
issue.
conversation,
Oh, so sorry.
yeah, go ahead, go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say the biggest issue my advisor likes to say is a lot of people die with pain, not from pain.
Yeah,
And because we have limited resources, people like to focus on the things that will kill you. Things that you will die from, not die with. So I think that's one of the reasons that pain is such a big thing, and yet doesn't seem to be getting as much attention.
yeah, it's led to those enormous gaps and the lack of research in it, right?
Yes.
I think one of the biggest takeaways from this conversation is that solving pain requires us to really rethink what our basic assumptions of what our brain is doing regarding pain is. And then, yeah, I think this is very insightful to many of us. If this episode made you think differently about pain, or how the brain constructs this experience of pain, share it with somebody you think might find it useful. If you guys enjoyed this episode and learned something new, make sure to follow on your favorite podcasting platform or on YouTube. I'm Avnish, this is The Early Perspective, and I'll see you in the next episode.